Hey there guys, it's Metro, and today we're going to be starting a series of guides on various Blood Death Knight topics. We're going to be trying to cover all the topics requested by you, the viewer, so if you'd like to see a specific one, feel free to leave a comment down below. As for this video, today we're going to be starting with the Blood Death Knight Legendaries. There will be an in-depth discussion of each legendary we can wear, but before we begin, I'd like to offer a TLDR, as this is one of my most received questions during the stream. For Mythic Plus, I use shoulders and chest for any single target situations. I use chest and Cephas for any trash or situations where you could reliably proc Cephas on AoE. And I use shoulders and Cephas for specific bosses, like the Fiend Archway, where you can interrupt something immediately and often on the encounter. Alright, so with that out of the way, we can begin going through each legendary. But before we do that, I'll also offer a reminder that in the description there will be a tier list, quote-unquote, style breakdown of each legendary option for those seeking to compare the one they have with the one that you might want to use. So anyway, let's get right into it. We'll start with Prida's. Very good legendary for non-tanks, let's put it that way. If you're somebody who needs to survive and you're not a tank, this is a top tier legendary, especially for high Mythic Plus, but also for rating 2, that same situation can apply. Unfortunately, as Blood Death Knight, it does pretty much everything we don't want it to do. Granting a random absorb almost never helps you as a tank, and the absorb is actually a little bit lower than perhaps the absorb might be on a different spec. So yeah, I would recommend not using this. The main reason is because every good tanking legendary will give you something for both defense and offense, and oftentimes they'll double dip along those lines. So when Prida's only gives you an absorb, it is a very, very poor choice if you ask me. Right into the best one, period. Shoulders is extremely strong, thanks to the also thanks to the haste and versatility on there, which are currently our best defensive stats, but also because the equipped is extremely strong for both offense and defense. As I said, the best legendaries will always give both, and this one certainly does. Blood Boil increases the damage and healing done by your next Death Strike by 20%, stacking up to 5 times. So this does stack multiple times when you have Dancing Rune Weapon up. You want to make sure that you're only using 1 Blood Boil per Death Strike with Dancing Rune Weapon up. Otherwise, try to get as many as you find applicable, especially in times of high AoE. You don't really need to be Death Striking all the time, so you can get 4 or 5 stacks and then Death Strike to full whenever you actually take damage. Very, 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 very good legendary, and if you can get one, if for some reason Blizzard ever allows you to pick one, I would heavily recommend getting this one as soon as possible. It is one of the reasons I do so much single target burst DPS. Next we have Archerish's Drapes. This is an interesting cloak piece that increases the duration of anti-magic shell by 100%. And any damage it absorbs heals you. Now that part's not very interesting, but what is interesting is the duration increasing by 100%. You see, this cloak, in my opinion, is the best legendary period for necrotic weeks. It allows you to always drop necrotic with AMS. It lasts now longer than necrotic, so all you have to do is use AMS and not have it expire. Unfortunately, in some dungeons that's not really feasible. If you use AMS and try to wait out the entire duration, it'll probably expire because of magic damage taken. But regardless, this is a very, very good piece. Anytime it's necrotic weeks, I use it, and other than that, I will never use it. It's entirely useful in raids, or useless, I'm sorry, entirely useless in raids and any other situations where you're not trying to game anti-magic shell. If you're having trouble with the duration of anti-magic shell, then I would offer you a different type of advice, all right, one way or the other. So let's move on to the chest now, which is one that you guys have seen me favor quite heavily over the last few months. Unfortunately, it has crit and mastery, so it's got very bad stats, especially with high mastery there. But Blood Plague gaining 100% damage and healing increase is nothing to sneeze at. It is a massive DPS boost, and I've seen a lot of people discuss which legendaries are the best for DPS. I really like this one. In fact, if you were here on Christmas Day, I actually did some log analysis on the stream where we looked at my Blood Plague compared to other people's trinkets and legendaries, and we see that my Blood Plague increased in a way that would be higher than most other legendaries being used. So you could actually compare, you know, go try different legendaries out. You can compare just how much the Blood Plague increase is. But again, like all good legendaries, it increases both defense and offense, because the healing, not only from Blood Plague, is nice, but the extra damage from Blood Plague makes Umbilicus higher. So it's essentially triple dipping. This is why I like this legendary so much. It's effectively threefold outstanding. And I would definitely recommend getting this one second if possible. You know, this would be the second best one, just because, especially with 5-mans being a bulk of my content, I'm getting very, very, very large Umbilicuses. As you guys see, fighting 6 mobs, I'm getting 20 million Umbilicus. That's double my health, you know, 3 times the health pool that I normally have. So, yeah, I'm not going to die when that's up. You know, it's a little overkill, but it's still very strong. Now, these ones are very strong, and until the chest came out, which was a couple months ago now, about 6 months ago now, these were the second best one outright for single target. So we have Shackles of Brindador. Death Strike refunding 15% of your runic power spent if it heals you for more than 10% of your maximum health. This is a bit troll, the wording. It always heals you for more than 10% of your maximum health unless you have literally 0 versatility, as the spell will always heal you for at least 10%. And with versatility, it goes up. So, yeah, this always works. All right, it always just refunds runic power. I've been toying with this on burst, like on especially short burst DPS fights. I think this might actually be better than the chest. Like I said, the chest really does equate to a lot of damage over the course of the encounter, but the extra Death Strike runic power refund during Dancing Rune Weapon can lead to much higher burst DPS. So I definitely think I should try this a little bit more. It's really a good legendary. It's probably going to be in my top tier. And the only downside of it is that it has some really bad stats on it, you know, once again. So that's unfortunate. Now here we have Service of Gore Fiend, which is probably my favorite legendary out of all of them. The main reason it's my favorite is, as you see there, it actually has leech on it. I believe that's 6% leech just on the piece, and that, you know, that's not random. It always is on there. It can't act, you know, legendaries can't actually have sockets and tertiary stats, so that's always on there. Unfortunately, the power isn't very useful for bosses or anything like that, but Heart Strike reducing the remaining cooldown on Vamp Blood by 2 seconds, that's going to really add up in 5-mans, guys. So if for some reason you're having any trouble with trash, I would recommend this as the best AoE-centric survival legendary. It's a bit awkward sounding, but if you can imagine this plus chest... Oh, we're in combat. If you can imagine this plus chest, imagine just how strong having that many more Vamp Bloods would be up during the course of the duration, and getting 20 million ones, right? So 20 million Umbilicus is just absolutely huge. I'm not really sure. I don't think there's a legendary out there that will protect you more than that combination. So if you're ever struggling with AoE survival, like for high fortified weeks, you really shouldn't as Blood, but this is a great option, especially because of the leech. Now, this is a crafted legendary that was added about halfway through Legion. It's not really something you should be considering using, but I've seen people ask me about it, so I'll talk about it real quick. It has high haste, which is nice, and it's got 3 sockets, so that's a lot of haste. I mean, you're talking about an extra, a good amount of extra haste, right? 600 extra, so very good from the sockets. But the healing thing is actually not that bad. So if you're brand new to Blood DK and you still only have 1 legendary or even none, I would get this one as soon as possible, because this one is a very good free legendary. And it heals you for 1% of your maximum health whenever an enemy is within 8 yards of you, which should be always. But when they're not, you actually move faster, which is actually a really good thing as Blood DK. It's kind of good, man. It's not bad at all. So I would definitely recommend getting it if you have no other legendaries. It's like, you know, it's not going to be the best one, but it can actually really play well into what you're doing. Then unfortunately we have the worst legendary. Essentially the worst legendary that Blood DK actually gets specifically. Haste Mastery, but high mastery, so not the best stats. Decent stats, not the best, but unfortunately the equip is entirely useless. Bone Shield reduces damage taken by an additional 2% and increases your maximum runic power by 60. We were talking about this on stream the other day, and I think what this would have to be good was increases your maximum runic power by 120 and increases the damage reduced by like another tenfold, like maybe 20% or maybe 10%, or it could make it so Bone Shield stacked higher too. So maybe like you can get 20 stacks of Bone Shields and it increases it by 2% and 60 runic power, or just another 10%, like, you know, reduces it by 10%, and whatever. One of the 3 would have to happen for this to be good. But yeah, currently these are the worst legendary as of, again, they offer you no offense. It is only defense. You can't really get much anything at all out of having the extra runic power. You really should not be just sitting there pooling runic power. I don't know. I'm not really sure what they were after with this one. And unfortunately, if you get these first, I feel bad for you, man, because this is without question the worst one. So anyway, we'll move on to Agrimar Stride. Now, I just said that the previous one was the worst one. This one is definitely the worst one, but it's not Death Knight specific. But I have a soft spot in my heart for this legendary because it's actually pretty useful for the biggest problem with Blood Death Knight, especially in 5-mans, is mobility, right? And this is kind of counteracting that. So unfortunately, again, it has high mastery, so terrible, terrible stat allocation, and it does literally nothing for you either offensively or defensively, but the speed isn't even that bad. So if you get this legendary, I'd still wear it over the pants, honestly. Like if it was between this and the pants, I would probably still pick this just because the pants don't do anything for you. They don't help you at all make up for any of the problems with Blood DK. The only real thing that you have a problem with is mobility, so these can actually help. Regardless, it's good to have for a speed set. I've seen a lot of people talk about that. So if you can have that legendary in your bags and switch to it, that could actually be pretty useful for 5-mans. But anyway, here is the real MVP, Cephas Secret. Very, 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 very good ring. And it has high crit and good amount of haste, so these are great stats for what we're going to be using them for anyway, which is offense. And of course, it's got a socket, and gaining 10% increased movement speed and 2% haste passively is never a bad thing. Also, it's going to apply, whenever you apply a loss of control effect, you're going to gain 70% increased move speed and 25% haste. So this is really nice. Every 30 seconds you can do this. So this is why I use this for trash. It's basically Bloodlust. Every time you interrupt something or death grip something or stun something, which is, we have a lot of options for that. It's really nice because Blood DK can use AoE grip, single target grip, interrupt, or stun to proc this, and they could also use Tremble Before Me, the talent. I don't use it, but it is an option if you're really having trouble with this. All you really need is a good weak ore to track it and then just be gripping things on cooldown. If you don't have it up on the pack, always start the pull with a death grip and you'll get exactly what you need from the buff, okay? So very, very good for actual AoE situations in 5-mans especially. Now, Lanathil's Lament is quite interesting. Very, very good stats. High haste. Now, that is a lot of haste there, guys. So this is an interesting ring. It's got a socket too. But it deals, you deal 5% more damage and receive 5% more healing while standing in your Death and Decay. We're going to talk about this a little bit, in a little bit here after we go through one other legendary at the end. But by itself, this legendary is okay. It's not the best, especially because Death and Decay, it's kind of got sporadic uptime, and unfortunately there's times where you're kind of forced out of Death and Decay, or you want to kind of lead yourself with Death and Decay. The way I like to play it is I always like to open the pack with Death and Decay if I have it, and I want to try to put it in between myself and the mob. So it deals damage to them, and I can get in it as soon as possible. But sometimes that's just not possible, and then you'd be wasting efficacy on the ring. So it's probably a decent legendary. I got it as one of my last ones, so I never got to actually try it. But we'll talk about it again in a second here, so just hang tight on that. We have Soul of the Death Lord, which is a very niche but useful legendary as well. It's going to give you Fall Bulwark, which is going to allow you to take Rune Tap as well. Now that's a very good thing for some dungeons, because especially Maw of Souls, any dungeon that's going to have a boss that's going to threaten your health pool somewhat regularly, you're going to want to try to go for Rune Tap. But losing Fall Bulwark is actually a really big deal. You don't realize how much health that contributes over time, especially on boss fights. So it's not really worth taking Rune Tap over Fall Bulwark over the course of the entire dungeon. But unfortunately, if Soul of the Death Lord gave Rune Tap instead of Fall Bulwark, we'd actually be able to switch it constantly to get Rune Tap, which is what a lot of specs and classes do in 5-mans and raids. Unfortunately, we don't have that option. You have to take Rune Tap if you want it. So obviously intentional on their part. They know what they're doing with that. But if you get this ring and you have no other option, it's not terrible. But otherwise, I would only use this situationally. It's not actually worth having Rune Tap 99% of the time. Most of the time, it's completely, it's just a wasted legendary slot. But it will help you in terms of survival. But like I said, if you get it early, don't get used to using Rune Tap, okay? It's a strong ability, but it uses a rune. You don't want to be giving up a rune for defense as a Blood DK. You have plenty of self-healing for that. So And now we have some interesting ones here. We have... Actually, let's go to Archimonde's Hatred Reborn first. This one's interesting because a lot of people are using it as a massive DPS increase. And you kind of were alluded to this earlier. I discussed it with the chest. I've measured my legendary against this legendary specifically, but some others as well. Basically, what it does is when you use it, you gain an absorb based on your maximum health. And when that absorb expires, it does that amount of damage to the mob. So with Vamp Blood, you can get to, yeah, like over close to 20 million health at times, right? So, yeah, you're going to have a very high health pool that you could use this based off. And it does a lot of damage, right, which I totally recognize, but it doesn't actually do, for me at least, when I did the comparison. Now, this isn't flawless math here, but when I did the comparison, I looked at multiple top parses where people were using this trinket. And every time, I think it was 4 different parses, my legendary did slightly more than theirs. And this was always on single targets. So yeah, it's good, but it requires you to use it in a way that's basically just gaming it. Like you're literally not using it the way it's intended. The way it's intended is to be there for a big defensive CD. And almost nobody uses it that way. Now, it seems like a good legendary for defense, but I don't know anybody who does it, who uses it for defense. So I can't say. Again, I think, you know, this is a decent idea because it gives both defense and offense in a way, but in the way that most people use it, it doesn't actually give defense. So I will never use this trinket. Now we have Insignia of the Grand Army. We're going to save this one for last here as because it's actually a really, really, really good legendary if you have the right consideration. So it has a large amount of haste and crit on it. If only adverse, it would be even better. But yeah, extra stats is always nice. I love that they do this for some of these legendaries that seem like they might be ineffectual if you don't use them right. And it's a socket, of course. So it increases the effect of light and shadow powers granted by Netherlight Crucible. Jesus Christ, I forgot to turn that off. Whoopsie. Anyway, somebody just did something. Anyway, so anyway, this is actually the best single target legendary that we have, okay? And it can be, or it could be the worst, depending on what you have in your Netherlight Crucible. In your Netherlight Crucible, you want to have ones that deal damage. So I'm not exactly sure what the names of them are, but let's take a quick look at what I have, and I'll tell you which ones would be the best. So yeah, I have Murderous Intent in 2, and then Refractive Shell in 1, right? So Refractive Shell is useless for DPS, does absolutely no DPS, and Murderous Intent is not very good. So there's like, I think it's like Shadow Bind or Call of the Weakness. I don't know. I don't know the names of these things, but regardless, if you have the DPS ones in your second tier of your Netherlight Crucible, this can actually be the best single target legendary in the game for us. All right, take a look at some logs. That's all you got to do. You'll see that with this on +3 damaging ones in your second tier, it's actually going to be an incredible DPS increase, much more than any other legendary. But of course, like I said, it requires a lot of good, going into it, because if you have the wrong ones, then this will be absolutely useless. So obviously you get this just from killing Argus. It's decent anyway, even if you don't have another legendary, you might as well use it. But if you're trying to maximize, you need to be very specific about what you pick on your Crucible. And then finally, of course, Amantul's Vision. This basically isn't a legendary, so I'm not even going to talk about it. If you get this thing, put it on. It's a free 1,000 item level piece, has an intense amount of stats. 3 of our best. Obviously, it's got all 4 stats on it, so that's huge. And of course, the wildcard proc for Amantul's Grandeur is insane for the raid. Obviously, this is something that you have to equip. It's not even really a legendary. Now, there's one other thing that I want to talk about, and that is in the Unholy spec, Death March, I guess it's called. This is an interesting legendary. I don't have it, but I've been very heavily interested in trying to use it, okay? It has crit and mastery, so that's not really good for it, but it does have high crit, so it's definitely better than the other options that we might consider. Now, Death Strike and Death Coil deal 10% increased damage, which is good, right? Because if you looked at the shoulders, it's actually, it's kind of mitigating the loss of the shoulder. Obviously, it's stacking up to 5 times is not mitigated, but over the course of the entire 5-man, this is only going to be for 5-mans, by the way, we're talking about this legendary. Over the course of the entire 5-man, that's going to add up. That extra 10% every single time you Death Strike is going to add up. But what's important is that it reduces the remaining cooldown of Death and Decay by 2 seconds, okay? So what I've been proposing is you could drop Death and Decay. Well, maybe like if you really want to game it, you'd pull Runic Power, enough to not cap, and then drop Death and Decay that will cap you, and then Death Strike 3 times back to back, which should be doable, and you'll actually get another Death and Decay before the previous one expired. Now, I don't know. I haven't tested this. This is my my theory, that you could actually get at least 100% uptime on Death and Decay. I don't know. If anybody has this and you have high haste, like over 30% haste, let me know if this is possible. And the reason I'm so interested in it is because as a paladin, if you have the right setup, you could actually have multiple consecrates down, and they both do damage. They don't just override each other. So I'm wondering, can you actually have multiple Death and Decays down with this legendary? I don't know. I've never tested it, but if you can, regardless, even if you can't, I'm very interested in trying it, because I think with Lanathal's Lament, this might actually be the best combination for AoE and 5-mans. Just a flat 5% more damage while standing in 100% efficacy Death and Decay, you know, always down Death and Decay, seems like it would be pretty overpowered. I don't know, a flat 5% buff to everything and to healing too is just nuts, right? Because that's actually going to increase it's going to increase our umbilicus, it's going to increase our burst DPS, it's going to increase our, you know, self-healing from Death Strike, which is already doing more damage with Death Strike as well. So this is an interesting combination, and when I finally get this helm, which may be never based on how these legendaries work, maybe never, but if I finally do get it, I'm going to try it heavily and I'll let you guys know. But otherwise, that's pretty much everything I got on legendaries. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, make sure you leave what topic video you want to see down below. I already have a bunch in my head, but I'm sure all of these are spawned from your guys' feedback. So maybe you'll even put more in my head, and I'll be happy to do these. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.